podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead Podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. This is Good Brothers Podcast featuring Justice Rajee and I, Majestic. Two good brothers. Let's get into the show. Peace. I'm Majestic.
What's happening, my brother?
What's good, family? What's good?
Oh, man, a little bit of everything. Just, we was building earlier. Just went out and put some work in this morning, and listened to a couple podcasts. So share some of those coming up in the future. I think that have been instructive. I've been running with podcasts on instead of music on the long days, actually, because it changes your cadence, right? It changes your running up, right? Because you're not running according to the energy or lack thereof of a song, but you're running according to almost like listening pace. So that's pretty much it with me. You talking about this tea, man? Tell me about this tea a little bit.
It was just some moringa revealed, little moringa leaf, and I think that's just about it. And I had a glass, I had a box of it, I guess, and I was like, got a lot of tea in the house. I got a whole drawer of tea, and we don't go through it fast enough. So I was going to make some coffee, but I said, I need to pivot, and because I have some moringa powder that I make, and I also have moringa salve that is made from the moringa leaf at our grandparents' old place. So there's a lot of moringa in my life.
Yeah,
but I was like, let me sip some of this tea and get my my morning going, in a different way. So
no, dig that.
So speaking of that, because it is actually that kind of leads us in, because the interesting thing about moringa as a tea product, there's a lot of like malunggay is what's called in Tagalog. There's another name I can't remember, but there's several different communities, cultures around the world that engage with the moringa tea, right? So I don't know who made it fresh in America or whatever, but you know what I'm saying, or when it became a superfood to people. But the reality sometimes when we talk about a global perspective, and I think what we have been adding on about sparked by you passing to me or for suggesting to me to check out the Anelka Misunderstood doc, which is on Netflix, and so that sparked, especially in this time right now, where folks are having I don't know, it's almost, I guess maybe it's like an existential crisis of blackness, and like I'm black, but I'm black this way, or I'm not black at all. This other, I'm American, African descendants, slaves. I'm a Moor, which ain't really a new thing. People saying they Moors, but I'm just saying that it seems to be back in vogue. Brothers that deal with certain perspectives of Israelite culture, so to speak, or as they call it. They have a particular concept, and then this idea of self, of definition of self, though, I think is where I'm, was tagging me. So, could you give me or share just like your thought on sort of the idea of like a global citizen or what have you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's And another part of that I think you brought up that you hear it and is in this conversation about Kamala Harris and this idea of this person being quote unquote Jamaican and Indian, but then people were like, but how is she black? Right. And then so there's a couple parts of that I think we should talk about. One, there's the idea of identification in an American context, right? Of you're born here, your people speak this kind of thing, your people perceive at least one parent to be from some form of global diaspora of blackness, right? And that normally is the traditional way we'll define somebody as being black. Now, obviously, that's nuanced and it should be interrogated, right? And in some senses, it can be all inclusive to the point where we minimize some of the other cultures, right, that people have. Right. But that just is generally the idea of what we understand that. And then there's the part of that that goes into participation in what I'm going to call black shit, right? So, when somebody, and again, I think this is a little different today with the agglomeration of global culture and agglomeration of black culture as pop culture. But there was a time when black culture was not pop culture, right? That it would become pop culture, but that it was not pop culture. So my point is, if you grow up in South Berkeley or East Oakland, listening to Too Short when Felix Mitchell was selling drugs and you know what I mean, people doing sideshows, right? And you're going to the festival by the park, by the lake and all this kind of stuff. And then you go to Howard, and you're on Georgia Avenue and you become part of one of our HBCUs. You see what I'm saying? Then you're getting into black shit.
Yeah.
And so not only did you have this idea, this, kind of ancestor from what someone could call the diaspora of blackness, then you actually started engaging in black stuff, right? So that's one part of this concept that I think we have a conversation about, that I think we've done, traditionally, we haven't had to debate that, or we haven't had to parse through that conversation, that now we have to a little more. But I think it's good to have the nuance to say, here's what we mean when we say this, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's been a challenging thing over the last few years for me, because it's like it's as if people, as if you thought that folks had come to some, not so much consensus, but maybe something close to a consensus, right? Around like, it's like, no, actually, like, all right, word up. If you've ever taken a Black consciousness, Black studies kind of 101 class at a college, right? Now, I know everybody ain't go to college, but I know a lot of people have taken a class that maybe didn't finish college, right? Or they had a nephew or a cousin or somebody that went to the class, and if you grab and I know how people feel about Maulana Karenga, some people, but if you look through his book, right, which I have a lot of problems with his with that particular text, but it has some grounding, at least giving you a spread of thought around a diversity of ideas of blackness. Right, you know what I mean? But anyway, so if you took a survey and you look through that and you surveyed, you go, okay, well, yeah, we have hard, reasonable evidence that you have a global population that is quite massive of people who are descendants of a particular world occurrence, right?
Right.
And also, in many senses, you could think of as the sort of the riders of the storm of a global sort of global social economic change in the way trade, commerce, everything is structured, right? And so that is deposited these folks who have common threads, but then have these divergent realities, that have been reshaped by where they live and where they're part of. And so, I'm saying, if you, and nuance that if you get into the weeds, even within those perspective places. So if the experiencing, from Brazil, the difference between Bahia and Rio de Janeiro, right?
Right.
The Venezuela versus Colombia,
Right.
I'm saying, and then the experience within those lands of people who may, be those descendant threads, the experience of our Haitian, brothers and sisters, and props to them on the Haitian Revolution, which was just a few days ago, the anniversary, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? And then you get into the weeds of the revolution, even, right? You see then a divergent thread of folks who you would look at and go, they're all black, but like you have folks who was freed earlier, or like you had these ill complexities. So then you get to the now, and like folks are going back to something I thought we would let go of, in a sense, like kind of like, is this person really a part of our community? You know what I'm saying? Now we all aware of everybody that's your skin folk ain't kinfolk, concept, and that's real. Like, I know what that's about, you know what I mean? But that also is a discussion about, sort of people's, vision and philosophy in real time when you may think you're in community with them.
Right.
And then it even something that was interesting raised just to juxtapose into this. I was listening to I think it was Thursday's Bomani Jones and Dominique Foxworth, and it was talking about Clarence Thomas for a minute, and it was and the point he made was that, we might think of Clarence Thomas like Clarence Thomas likes, quote unquote, white America more so than black people, right? But then also Clarence Thomas is from, I think he said, Pinpoint, Georgia, right? And it's basically Clarence Thomas ain't had no experience that would make you think he was endeared to the realities of sort of the dominant power dynamics of the United States. Although that don't necessarily mean how he sees the world, right? And the philosophies he has adopted means that he, will suddenly embrace whatever we might consider, a broader, black perspective, right? And so what's wrong with that is the realities of like where people are from, how they show up, and then what they choose, are all sort of a part of what we would consider a black identity. It's like you, depending on your skin tone and part of the country and other stuff, you may assume certain things about people, but in reality, till you really know their story, it's a real weird exercise when you're trying to X people out.
Right.
And or not seeing and embracing, like, actually, their experience is a valid experience, right? That is an experience, like, you didn't know about that experience. You didn't see that experience as something that was akin to you. You know what I mean? But their experience was very, right in line. And so when I started checking out, Anelka, and the ill thing is that, first of all, son's nice.
Oh yeah.
And I was looking, I was like, how do I know about Bull? And then I'm like, realized, like, oh, I have seen you before. I just didn't, I mean, like, I didn't watch all of the soccer in the late 2000s. I watched, like World Cup a couple times and stuff, but I didn't have TV like that back then. It's different times, you know what I'm saying? But I had seen him before, but I didn't, remember his name and other things. And then I'm like, oh, he had with Terry Henry and shit. And I'm like, oh, I'm like, damn. So, it was a different lens, but it was a reality very akin to, the modern athlete in America that's playing basketball or football, right? Where you got all these systems built around your talents, right? And finding your talents,
right? And
then finding a way that if you start to profit from your talents, that other people profit too, right? Which is and then with that, you move into that world where folks, all the negative assumptions, especially about your motivations, become something that can be, operated against you. And And within that, you're trying to, make your decisions in a space where folks don't totally understand your perspective and they make a lot of assumptions about you. And before we get all into that, because where I was originally going though was just I'm not sure how did we get to this sort of re-litigation of blackness.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think we got there because I think there was generally held premises by the cultural community and even the academic community, right? Like the mix of like the cultural community of what people saw as blackness, and then kind of like what the kind of campuses, which I think were impacted by the cultural community, right? What people saw. And then I just think we went from there back to like debating the entire concept when we started kind of going into reparations and people started rolling with reparations, who gets them, right? So originally you're just having this idea, you're saying, okay, well, black folks deserve reparations. Well, who gets the reparations? And well, then only these people should get it because these people didn't have this experience and they weren't, truly black. They aren't black in America and all this kind of goofy shit, right? And so I think, but my point about the black experience in America and the uniqueness of it and how different it is in different parts of America, then connected to a global context of blackness that in some senses may not always have to do with explicit chattel slavery, but has to do with capitalism. It has to do with race as a social construct and then as a practical thing, right? Because as much as people want to talk about race as a social construct, right? Well, it becomes real when racism occurs.
Right.
So it's all good that it's a social construct until you getting beaten in the head because of it, right? Then it ain't just a social construct, it's a real thing that's occurring to you. So then you start to connect to this idea of race and culture intertwined. But you don't have the global experiences to really say to connect those things. I think in the 60s, 70s, less so in the 80s and stuff, but you started seeing black folks in America really connect with global blackness, to your point. We don't have those same conversations today, even though you have many more people who identify in the global context of blackness in America now, right? But they may not have the traditional African-American experience, right? So you might have some Jamaicans from Belize, right, in LA, right? Or you got the Panamanians who speak Spanish, but were the descendants of Jamaican sharecroppers who went to the canal, right? They have a different culture, but that's global blackness. It just didn't have its root in America. You see what I'm saying? It even had its roots in chattel slavery or in the shipping of people, but it didn't have its explicit American experience, which is why I thought Anelka, going back to this, is so important because you're watching a masterful soccer player who, if you just inserted, you could be like, that was Iverson. You see what I'm saying? Like if you just inserted an extremely talented dude that's from the bagnoles in the suburbs of Paris and whose family, they call like a clan, right? But in a negative sense, that y'all are all too close and that your brothers are ruining your career. Think about how many basketball players we've said the same thing about.
Right.
Think about how many football players we've said the same thing about, how many rappers we've said the same thing about, that the group around you are the people ruining your life. Right. And so, but you're just seeing it in a French context. And so as I'm watching it, like, man, we miss the global understanding of blackness, having these particular fights or not having nuanced conversations about the specific American context and how it relates to a global context. So Anelka then goes through, he plays with all the teams, right? Like, the fact you play with PSG, Paris Saint-Germain, the fact you play with Manchester City, right, and beat my favorite team, Manchester United, over and over again. But you know what I mean? Like you're playing with all the team, Real Madrid. Like you're playing with these global heavyweights, and I say that global heavyweights, right? Because as soon as you get off these borders, as soon as you get out this border, and even some places in these borders, but definitely when you get out of these borders, you recognize that football is the global sport. You know what I mean? When I was in Geneva, all I saw was jerseys from Manchester City, Manchester United, Paris Saint-Germain, Juventus. Like, this is Real Madrid, Barca. This is what you see. And this is what you see black people wearing. You know what I mean? Like, you might see people wearing a LeBron jersey, or, you know what I mean? Like, you'll see some of that. But in a global context, these brothers and these people of varying degrees of course, being original people, but also specifically black people, are the people who are being followed. Right? And so when you don't make that connection, you miss this you miss it. And that's why you have a debate over Kamala Harris. Because you don't understand that the same thing is happening to soccer players over here. Right? And so I just think that was a really important part of it. And I'm watching it, and like, again, even going back to this conversation, his family was from Martinique, right? It was from Martinique and then went to France. And so even him bonding himself back, like, yo, at the end of the day, we're West Indian. And that was another big piece to me. And I want you to, kind of get your perspective on this too. That he had multiple identities. Yeah. And I feel like in America, we don't allow blackness to be seen through multiple identities.
Yeah. No. I would say we actually tend to, and somehow I'm gonna say this. My experience is that we thread to a single start point, and so we'll go like, oh, you Black America, and then like, okay, you from down south, right? And so then like the down south becomes a like, that's you are from this amalgam of whatever down south means, right?
Right.
So you're not maybe going, like in my case, my grandfather's from Garner, you know what I'm saying, North Carolina, you know what I mean, in those environments. My other side of the family's out of in the Darlington, South Carolina area. And then another thread is like like Virginia, but probably Lynchburg and West Virginia. You know what I'm saying? Like, and a
lot of black folks that come from West Virginia, because I think sometimes we be acting like ain't no black folks in West Virginia.
Yeah, it's a whole lot of black folks.
And a lot of black folks who left West Virginia to go east or go north to other places, to the point where we don't think like Reverend Sullivan from OIC, like he was from West Virginia.
Yeah. Like and then you thread it, and then you go, oh, okay, wait. Even within the context of them spaces, and some of that is, you got one piece. You have limited access to information, right? So you may not have the time to order good fortune that you can find some other documentation or something that can, or someone that remembers the stories that could say, also though, my grandfather used to say that his dad was from, he came here, like he showed up on a boat or some shit, or he was like,
right.
Why was he on a boat? And then you could put together like, oh man, maybe his pops was, brought over in a late trade, or, maybe they like, there's a whole lot of other contexts that could occur, right? From folks who escaped, and ran in Nova Scotia or some shit, or was in Ontario, or if they was coming over from, folks that when the Haitian Revolution happened and they ended up in New Orleans, and even a city like New Orleans, right, which I got to get to, but where folks, the city of New Orleans is older than the nation state of the United States, right? It has its own thread of development that is not based totally in whatever we would ascribe to U.S. ideas, which is also then part of the rub, where structural pivotal challenges and also treatment, right? So America itself is always our country, and as far as the dominant, political has had this thread of like legitimacy and trying to establish that it is the right way, right? And so with that, when we get into this like integration, not integration, or joining the mainstream, like the back part of that is this nation state is always trying to, and there's people who are always fighting, which made the whole thing in the last couple of years around like, oh, well, this party is too into identity politics and that party's not. It's all lies. Everything's an identity.
Right.
Everything is tied into how people perceive themselves in the world, and then what they need to do to keep that, to affirm and lay down to sustaining that world view of themselves. And depending on where you sit in relation to power to impose or put your ideas into action, right? Because you can impose your ideas and you can also put your ideas into action, which aren't the same thing. Some people have the power to impose their ideas. Other people have to, you have the power to like impact your own space, but you can't really impose them on anyone else, so much. So when you look at somebody like Anelka, right? So we from our lens could go like, oh, he's like a, you might hit him with the racial ambiguous, right? Because he's dark, but his beard hair looks this way, and it kind of got a weird accent, and he speaks French. Right. So since you speak French, I don't think you're actually like us if you're an American.
Right.
African American. Most of the time, you're gonna be like, well, you speak French, so you on some French stuff. You know what I'm saying? The same way we look at people that look exactly like us, but they speak Spanish, and we'll be like, oh, well, you speak Spanish. It's like, bam, it's a language. like they can speak. There's thousands of languages on the planet, right? But in any event, and then you go, okay, and I've had the good fortune to go to Martinique, which was really dope. And Martinique is like a part of the French state. I forget how it's perfectly correctly, the exact, legal concept. But if you were born in Martinique, you can go, you know what I'm saying, and those families that go and work and or do business or whatever in France, because similar to, I think the structure is similar to like Puerto Rico and the U.S. government, where it's like a territory, but I don't totally remember.
Okay.
And you have folks that Puerto Rican brothers and sisters that are U.S. citizens. You know what I'm saying? They're part of the U.S. thing, but they also is like a territory. And some folks stay, some folks come to the States.
Right.
That's how they find your opportunity or do what you need to do. And when you get into like, you are yourself, right? You're born, you're the child of your parents and your family, right? And then so that's one layer. Then where you from, right? So I'm we are both born in the Delaware Valley. You on the on the west side of the river, me on the east side of it, so to speak. I'm born in Trenton, and then I have a Trenton layer of experience and understanding, and then I have a Willingboro layer of experience and understanding, and then I have an overall New Jersey and where my family was at layers of how I perceive what's normal for people to do or what things are important or what's curious, right? And if in that experience, right, where I grew up around, folks who were considered of traditional African American folks. I grew up around Haitian and Jamaican folks. I grew up around, and then a few other, Puerto Rican, Dominican, a couple other, cultural groups. If it doesn't track, I don't have an experience of feeling not with those people. But then when I would meet people who did not grow up around anybody who saw themselves that way, right? They go like, oh, well, they do this, they do that. And it's like, well, I mean, it ain't really that weird. It is not as weird as people will talk to you about it, right? They'll be like, oh, well, they eat this different food. I'm like, well, it's not really that much different. I mean, it's got some different spices and these other things, but it's actually the same food. It's in the same, if we was doing a phylum, what do you call it with the species and whatnot? Like it would be like, yeah, it's a leafy green, some form of protein, rice, or a potato or a yam, or a sweet potato. Like,
right.
These are actually similar constructs of how to organize food because it's coming from people who have a common root, at least a part of their line, in terms of the broader African diaspora. But for the same reason that, this country will embrace the idea of like, not anything like, oh, don't do anything that makes it seem too European. You know what I'm saying? Even though you got these people that are from Europe.
Right.
But they will work real hard to be like, but we're not, we're over here type.
But meanwhile, but championing everything that came from the motherland, right? So to your point, championing everything that came from Ireland, championing everything that came from Italy, but then this country being like, we don't eat French fries. So you know what I mean? We eat freedom fries. Like,
freedom fries.
You know what I'm saying? So but I think that's what happens. It rubs off on us in the context of this identity and missing. And again, because you didn't grow up, you grew up in a place where they had put these rims up because James Naismith was a good communicator, and next thing you know, they were in every YMCA, right? That's why you like it. That's why you like basketball, because they figured out how to put them up in every YMCA and it was a Christian benevolent organization that then showed up everywhere, right? Like, it's not complicated. It's you know what I mean? Like, black folks at one point were really good at baseball. Quote unquote ADOS, or native born black folks in America, were really good at baseball, and then we started doing something else. It's not that baseball is more or less, a black sport. It's not. It's only the conversation of what you've been exposed to. So because we don't have this global sense, and we don't have, and I say this about a lot these days, we're ahistorical. You know what I mean? We revel in being ahistorical because the information we're receiving and our processes always feed our fast twitch ideas. Nothing feeds the slow intake of information and the slow understanding and process of history, which should inform how you see a present day context. It's always informed by the short-term response of being of difference. Right. And, this idea of these narcissistic definitions of things based on small differences. You know what I mean? And it creates this navel gazing that we do so that we miss something like Anelka and Nico, Anelka, and see that the same things are happening to black folks in France. So why is the same thing happening to the sports guy in France that's happening here? Right? What would be the difference? Even though they're playing drastically different sports, you're still seeing the same thing. You're still even seeing someone like Melo, unless you didn't get brought back, Dame didn't go to bat for him, who would have been out the league.
Yep.
A guy that drops 20 would have been out the league. That wasn't an accident. Right? Like, what do you mean he wasn't good enough to play for any team? He's clearly good enough to play for the Blazers, who were in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Right. So we can just see that the same things are occurring. But I think, also, again, going back to this idea of blackness, that they don't define it like that per se, but you've seeing them and being like, hey, man, I'm from where I'm from in Paris. And, listen, I just don't give a damn. like I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to be the best. I don't really get into the French, the government's idea of propriety. And then, a lot of this stuff that soccer teams, how they want to deal with players and all that kind of stuff, I'm not really into that either. And guess what? I made a lot of money. And so I don't really care. Right. And so. Right. And I watched it. And he's like, yeah, I'm living in Dubai, teaching my kids to play soccer. So I'm like, dang, first of all, Slim is extremely unbothered. Like, he's extremely unbothered. Like, whatever. Y'all got rid of me. I don't care, man. Like, I made my money. I did the way I did it. And y'all made a mistake. Right? Yeah. I was misunderstood by this government, and y'all made a mistake, but there's a global sense of being misunderstood. And when you separate that global sense of being misunderstood, you actually miss the bigger picture and a whole host of other things that come. One of the other things that's interesting, and before I get into the Stormzy conversation, is if you think about right now how what we call like African music, quote unquote Afrobeat, even though it's not really traditionally Afrobeat, right? It's actually like the reggaeton. It's like a reggaeton beat.
Yeah.
Which itself was, again, Panamanians speaking Spanish over a reggae beat because they were descendants of Jamaicans who went to Panama Canal. So reggaeton is explicitly a kind of a fusion of the black diaspora, right? That then becomes the backbeat for African music globally. That then now is accepted more in America. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So we'll see all these things occur, but then still have debates about blackness.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a limiting, right, of how you see the, like, it's like you have to almost intentionally not try to see the threads, right? Because then you have, and I think, and I'm, beehive, do what you got to do, but a criticism, of beyond. And I haven't watched the new thing. I'm watching, but I've seen some clips, or whatever, of like bringing in some of that energy, like into what she does, right? And so there's some people that see that as like she's kind of taking, like, which I think any great artist at that level does, is they go, oh, I need to stay current. Let me pull in what the new people doing. Like, what's the new thing people into? Let me see how I can flip and bounce with that. Like, especially, from where she does, from the kind of music she makes, right? And it's a, to me, it's a fair criticism, but it also, I'm also not one that doesn't see criticism as a bad thing. Criticism means you're getting good feedback. But the idea that, like, yo, actually you got this music that we call hip hop that in many ways, what I'm saying, was an inspired turn that deals with not just culture but also technology and access.
Yes,
right?
By the very nature of it.
Yeah, right. So then it becomes this, then it blows, it becomes this world phenomenon. It goes out, other people hear it. This for some people, it's the first time they seen us in a long time. They're like, oh snap, look at them. They look like us. They over there doing this, man, and it's beats, and people, kids is dancing, and they're talking fast, and they're talking about all sorts of, like, social, political things. Sometimes stuff that ain't so deep. Sometimes that's super deep. You know what I mean? But then folks, and then they're pulling up, rhythms and pieces and parts of all these different musics that some of us like. So then but you can get into a place where, like, you may not know about, like, the the Afro-Cuban All-Stars, you know what I'm saying, doing what we would consider like Cuban style music, but all the lyrics are in Wolof, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's and the structures are, are even, not that the music in Cuba is not connected to the diaspora, but like it's like going over there, come back where some of those people may have been from, and on an ancestral level, and then it's getting this other layer, and then it's going back over there, right? So there's these exchanges going on, and we especially, I feel, especially in America, in the United States, we are pushed to only think of the world as the United States, right? So we can get incentivized to not connect with a global blackness, right? So we will just go like, no, man. I mean, like, that's cool what them people's doing, but I'm just like African American, man. I want to listen to some blues, and it's like, the blues is one of the most African things in the history of the universe. What do you mean? Like, yeah, it's ours, but it also is rooted in constructs and ideas about music and an experience that there's a reason other people resonate with that, right? So, yeah, I wanted to pass it back to you.
No. So I just think that it's an important part of this conversation in a broader sense to be able to make these links. And I think for me, you can get it in America because you can look at all this stuff enough. And one final thing I'll say, this is interesting. When you think about when people say down south, like, now we use foodstuffs, we know that the culture of what we call down south food is an amalgamation itself of African, indigenous, and some white cooking techniques. Mm-hmm. Largely African, but substantially indigenous. You know what I mean? Like, the idea of barbecue didn't come from Africa, even though they barbecue in Africa. Yeah. But it had its root. In its American context, it had its root here, right? Mm-hmm. With the native people of this land. And so I just think it's important for us to think about that when we look at other cultures doing something, like, oh, okay, that's almost like European, or that's this. Well, even what you call being from down south is still an amalgamation of culture. You know what I mean? And different things were brought in by different people, right? When you're down to south and you're eating French bread, right? Mm-hmm. And with a pate on it, and you just call it a po' boy.
Right.
by its very nature, Slim, it's a New Orleans sandwich, but by its very nature, that's also a global sandwich.
Yeah.
Right? That then also makes sense when you say, well, who else is eating a sandwich with a spread on it like this? A banh mi, right?
Right.
Like, and so when you're seeing the global connections and relationships, you just can't be disconnected off into, again, what America does with this American exceptionalism of Black culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so last thing I would say, one thing I've been interested in recently before traveling there, but especially after, is London Black culture, right? And I think London is an interesting place because, again, it has a large and substantive Black population in Britain across the board, not just London. Because I've come to learn, just like America, it's almost being like that only Black people live in New York, right? like that's what sometimes I think how it's treated. Like, oh yeah, it's Black people in like London. Like, no, it's Black people in Manchester. It's Black people in Liverpool. It's Black people in Scotland, right? Like, it's Black people in Ireland. It's Black people everywhere, like in the UK. But again, their experience is also fundamentally different in that they didn't largely get there, although there have been some people there obviously since the era of enslavement and that kind of global trade. But also a lot of them got there through the Windrush generation, which was literally like the 40s and 30s, right? The Windrush generation was the folks that came across to work and stuff like that, and millions of folks then just kind of was sent into the different industrial centers of England. And you know, and then there's even stuff that like goes back to like those folks never actually being citizens. There's a lot of interesting stuff about the Windrush generation and Black British culture. But I bring that up because, again, Black British culture evolved with many similarities to a Black American culture, but also differences, right? Like, their stuff was more, I think, was more specifically from the diasporas of the islands, right? In the kind of quote unquote, British Empire. So you saw a lot of people from continent of Africa, obviously a lot of folks from the islands, and developed things. And, they took on hip hop in a unique way, right? And then did something else with it. Even if you look at how they took on the idea of lovers rock reggae, right? Lovers rock reggae is a specific British reggae. Like it's done other places, but it started in Britain. But it started as their take on American R&B. Like that's how lovers rock started. It was, we want to sing these songs, we want to sing them to slower reggae sounds. And then that's when you get like Red Wine and UB40 and all of that. That's actually specific takeoffs of lovers rock. British culture. So I'm, just for some context for this, but when you're there and you see kind of like Black culture there, which has a lot of influences from America, but also the challenge of these two powerful forms of engagement, which I was telling you about, which is like white British culture and then Black American culture. Because Black American culture has been the best at being packaged and sent to the world, it also tends to come in and be very imperialistic in its own way. We used to see it in Canada, right? And the term I realized was nigga imperialism, right? So because you're like, okay, wait. So now y'all had your own thing doing your own thing, but now everything is about Rap City and like, gang culture and like, you know what I'm saying? Just like American culture. And so you miss the global senses of Blackness because American culture is being presented. And so then even for Black Brits, it's like you have to be seen through this lens of, is it like Black American culture? And it's like, no, it's Black British culture. Obviously, it's had some influence from Black American culture, but it's not Black American culture. It's Black British culture. So Stormzy in a GQ recently talks about that idea of like Black British culture getting its own due and being seen as unique unto itself. Right? And not having to be defined by white British culture or Black American culture from a musical context or reading context to truly be understood. Right. And so, as we understand, I think, look at global Blackness, and while it's all good and right to have a specific American, like an American context of Blackness, because that's where you may be from. It's also important to blend it with this like global idea of culture. And although you won't hear me say this a lot of the times, I think Drake is to actually be celebrated for that in his own weird way, because he kind of filters in and out of like Black American culture, right?
Yeah.
Black British culture, Black Canadian culture, and then a larger West Indian culture, even though he's not actually West Indian. You see what I'm saying? But in Canada, even though you're not West Indian, it doesn't matter. You're Black, and so you're going to be exposed to quote unquote West Indian culture in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing it brings up too, because it becomes, which is sort of the hallmark of sort of institutionalized, or, I don't know, maybe it might not be the right word or totally applicable, but sort of the way, if the institution that gets to tell the most prolific message frames you through a certain lens, then that lens becomes a lens you got to keep wrestling with. Right. So, it's like it's like, and I would say this actually as someone from New Jersey, where folks' context for New Jersey is usually sort of, it's basically most people don't have a Black context for New Jersey, so they think of New Jersey and they think of New York, right? And so then you be like, no, I'm from New Jersey though, and they'd be like, nah, so y'all like, and it's like, no, I'm not from New York, like I'm not, and then especially people where I'm from, I'm like, I'm actually more culturally aligned with what you would see out of Philadelphia, right? And then you would have people that would be like, well, how does that happen? There's Black people over there? I'm like, yes, there's hundreds of thousands of us. It's like whole communities of Black people all across that state, right? But it doesn't have a, now, some people would say like maybe now it does, but externally to the world, you grow up in a space where you're next to these other two places that are resonating, so sort of ideas out into the world, and you just have to learn how to have your own identity and also understand that part of you is tied in with that, right? That you find similarities and you understand those places, but that people may not really know your name, so to speak. And I think that, so that like on a kind of interpersonal community level, but then on the external community level, when others are evaluating you, if you're from the Northeast, and unless you're from Boston, which is New England's a whole other thing, but if you're from the Northeast, it's like, oh, you're from the Northeast, the gritty streets of the Northeast, like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, you know what I'm saying? Or you're from the Midwest, you know what I'm saying? Then becomes this other thing, but it also ultimately gets into a thing that people don't really know the details, right? They're not actually looking to get the threads. And what we always have to think about is there's what people assume about you when you show up based on how you look. You know what I mean? As we talked about, you spoke on earlier, that the social construct becomes real when people start making decisions about you because of how you look, right? And expectations and assumptions. And so you have sometimes, depending on people's own tone of life, where they spend their whole life, trying to argue to be seen as just themselves. And I understand that, right? Sort of like, I mean, when we say about your man OJ, like he just wanted to be OJ and shit. Like he didn't want to be dude from the projects in San Francisco. You know what I'm saying? He wanted to just be him. And it's like, amid OJ's other problems, just for the record, like take that, I don't know, some other kind of way. But the reality that life is, and especially for us, is, at least as I see it, you either have to decide, I'm going to embrace that I have my own perception of myself and my own sense of self that I have developed and rooted and grown and nurtured over my years of life. And then I have all the things people may assume about me when I walk in the room based on how I present. And I can choose to be, and then I look at it as I have the opportunity to take where you might think something silly, right? And therefore take me lightly. I use that as an advantage. Other things I may have to overcome, where you might also think I'm silly, but, not give me an opportunity. So I need to confront that. I got to figure out, how do I navigate around that? I guess what I'm saying is I try to take a proactive position on it, right? That, there's places that when I show up because of my skin tone, you know, as I understand to see, folks may go, oh, like, oh, he might, like I said, happens here. Oh, he must be mixed. I'm like, no, not in not in the last 112, 115 years, as I could tell. However, I dig it. You know what I'm saying? I see where you're coming from, right? Because your context of a black person that comes in this skin tone here is they must recently be the descendant of somebody who just was in, you know, a relationship across, you know, certain, you know, racial constructs, right? Where on the other hand, if I show up and it's like, oh, well, your accent is confusing. Like, sounds like you're from here. And I'm like, well, I'm from New Jersey. You know what I'm saying? Like, I because of however I talk, every once in a while, I sound a little bit like I'm from the South. And then other times, like certain stuff come out and it sounds more, you know, New Jersey and more North Jersey specifically.
Right.
I don't have full control of why that happens. I don't totally understand why that is. But those are the contexts that I've learned to be aware of. And I think that when you get into, like, there's a comfortability that one has to have when you unmoor from the thing that, like, a whole lot of other people already agree on, right? So, like, if people are like, oh yeah, we black, we do this, we eat this kind of food, we like our music this way, our families got these things going on, and then you be like, yeah, that's cool, but I ain't really into none of that shit,
right?
But people look at you like, what? Wait a minute. Well, if you ain't into it and you look like me, do I got to change too? I'm like, not really. That's your business. I'm just telling you, I ain't into none of that.
Right.
Like, I'm over here I'm doing this other thing. And then where you can go, like, actually, there's a whole lot of other people that look like us that's also into this other thing. You know what I'm saying? You know, we just on different threads. Yeah. I think it's very difficult. And I think depending on how much of the global culture you're taking in, and then what you do for folks to stand on that island, you know, to a degree, and go like, nah, man, we move this way, and then I see myself, you know, in these contexts.
No, for sure, man, for sure. So I would kind of transition out of this by saying, you know, folks in America, for you know, for those of us, and you know, we do have a unique experience globally, but we don't have the only experience globally, right? We are part of a larger diaspora that takes on a lot of different forms, and the mixings and the transition, the fusions that even have happened to us here have had us do that with many different things. So it's just important to understand global blackness, and to also, like, you know, and it sounds, it's horrible that this appears to be the province of whiteness to say this, but get into some other sports. Like, you know what I mean? Like, seriously, like, get into some other sports. Like, you know, I'll just, it's important to note that I learned to play tennis at an early age. My father learned to play tennis in his 20s. And that was a sport that was given to me from a really early age. And now, because of the advent of Serena and Venus, no one thinks tennis is a white sport. But you and I both know that there's history going back 100 years of black people playing tennis in America.
Mm-hmm.
But up until a certain point of time, if you told someone you played tennis, they still thought you were playing a white sport. Mm-hmm. Right? And so race in America and the crushing kind of like cultural oppression is so deep that you be like, yo, once you check out soccer, man, soccer's for white people. I can't believe you just said that. Like, you know what I mean? I can't believe it is literally the easiest sport to play on the planet other than running. It's just a ball in your feet. You know what I mean? And you look at folks globally and who's doing it. And I just think it exposes you, you know, and it just doesn't have to be that. It's obviously other sports, but I just think, you know, we kind of get into this space of accepting these parameters, and even in some senses inadvertently defending the wrong parameters of blackness, as seen as, you know, kind of propagated in America.
Indeed. So, well, one other thing I'd add, just maybe to close my thought on this too, is I really think that for our well-being in the long term, and even to get perspective on what happens to us here is I just would challenge people to take the time to one day just sort of sort of reframe, you know, if you got like a map, like turn the map upside down, right? Instead of the way you maybe normally, like put the south so it's pointing up and the north's pointing down. I know the words are going to be funny, but that's okay. And then, you know, put a little, like maybe a little, some rulers, something to block out the land, right? You know, wherever you come from, just change the angle. And then think about what your world is and what your life is based on some of your own choices, right? And kind of explore the idea that that America and the United States is a country that you live in, that you may be a citizen of if you were born here or moved here naturalized in some way. However, that nation does not define everything that you can be connected to or part to. It's just one piece, right? It's one part. It's and then there could be these other things. And then just like, you know, play with that idea. So sit with that idea that like people in, you know, randomly pick one on the map. Them people may not be as far from you and as you think, and say, well, how could I find a way to connect myself with that land? Right. And then so look at your family, look at your what you're into musically, culturally, you know, where your products come from, the food you eat, and just start drawing some lines. And then and just make that a practice just to start to visualize, you know, connections that define you in a different way. You know what I'm saying? And I don't want to shape nobody's outcome for them. I just want people to embrace the idea that you need to sometimes really physically make a picture of what it is you say you are and what you're connected to. And, you know, let me know how that exercise goes for you. So, with that, I wanted to, you know, just to close out our time, in the recent days prior to this recording, a great brother of ours, this one meant, you know, was a big part of my and, you know, I'm speaking for myself in my development as a man and as a person on earth, you know what I mean, as God. I Add returned, and I just want to, you know, to the degree that I feel he would want, just make a little space to say peace and thank you and express my admiration and gratitude for what he added to my life.
Yeah, nah, man. You know, we know that, you know, when a person comes here to manifest the nature of their own greatness and their own, you know, self divinity, that they don't leave in a common sense, that you know, it's their ideas and their perspectives and their visions and the impacts they've had on the planet remain, so they don't die in that traditional sense. So we know that. You know, just to add on to what you're saying, but at the same time, one of the things, you know, with our brother, I Add, if nothing else, you know, I Add let you right where he stood. He let you know right where he was from the break, you know. But he fundamentally exercised love and honor and appreciation and values, man. That you know, I'm not one of them people that's going to say, "Oh man, you know, look at the old days and all the good people are returning to the essence." What I'm going to say is that if you know, as people often say, but it's very real. Like when you got people that you love and you cherish them. Now, one of the things that, you know, anytime I stop, you know, I would call a God, or God would call me. You know, we didn't the phone call. I love you, God. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And that was just to make sure that that was known and that was there. You know what I mean? And you know, it's a huge loss for the entire nation. It's a huge loss uh, for DC in particular. You know what I'm saying? The brothers and sisters down in DC in that area, but also just across the country, across the world, of all the people that he impacted. You know what I mean? And you know, uh, what he would say, physically, you know, if he would say, keep building and don't stop, right? And don't. So you know, just the thing is, you know, when you have an idea you're dedicated to, you got to keep pushing the idea. So with that, I say peace.
Indeed. So with that, yeah, we out.
Same bad time, same bad place. Peace.
Peace. Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, Majestic. Thank you to you, the listener, for supporting and making time for us to be a part of your world. Please listen, rate, subscribe, and share wherever you make your thing happen on the internets. You can support Ask Your Oldhead Podcast, Good Brothers, and all our future works and projects via Patreon. Just look for Ask Your Oldhead and become a subscriber. Every little bit contributes to keeping this here thing running and afloat, and I appreciate it. You can also do what I think is the simplest thing, which is, man, just listen to the show. Listen every week. If you want to get some feedback, you can hit us on Instagram. You can shoot a message to me on Twitter. You can leave a phone number. There's a phone number in the show notes. You can leave a voice message. You know what I'm saying? Leave a message if you want one. In any event, man, appreciate you. Be safe. See the world and see the bigger picture. And don't let these fake borders hold you back from connecting to the reality and the human experience. And with that, I say peace.